This week we'll be looking at volume and how to find the volume for different 3D shapes. This first lesson we will begin with looking at the rectangular prism. Your vocabulary words you need to know. The first one is prism. This is a 3D shape and it has two identical shapes facing each other. When we look at pictures we will highlight that, but these are all 3D shapes. Last week when we were finding area, those shapes would be flat, so 3D, we're going to add one extra dimension to the shape. Next word is volume. That's what this whole section is about. It's the amount of space that an object occupies. Usually we just say the amount of space inside a 3D shape. So if you think of like a soda bottle, the milk boxes, how much can fit inside of that? That is the volume. And that is what we'll be looking at for the next few math lessons. Today it's about the rectangular prism. It's a 3D shape. And it's made up of 6 faces. Those faces are just shapes. And they're all rectangles. And the opposite sides are going to be congruent. Congruent, that just means that it is going to be the same size. And so you'll have those on each side to look at. So here's what a rectangular prism looks like. That first vocab word you had was prism. And that's where that opposite side is the same shape. So if I was to look right here, you have this rectangle, and on the opposite side, you have this rectangle. Those are exactly the same. If we wanted to, we could look at this top rectangle, and then its opposite side is going to be congruent to it also. It is going to be the same. That is what congruent means. It's the same size, the same shape. We could also compare this shape by looking at this back rectangle and then compare it to this front rectangle. So that is where we get the definition prism. That is what makes it 3D. And so what we really need to focus on for this assignment is you have your length times width. If you remember, that is what the area of a rectangle was. But we're going to add a third dimension. That dimension for the prism or the rectangular prism is going to be the height. So this height is also the same as this one, and this one. Those are all the same measurements. But you're just going to take your rectangle, and then you're going to take that one line that comes off of it. So that's your length, that's your width, and you have your height. That is what you'll need to know for this assignment. It's just those 3 numbers. You take one rectangle, doesn't matter which one, and then you take one number that is going to connect to find your height. So just like when you were finding the area, you had a formula, and so this is your formula that you will use for these shapes. Once again, when working these problems, you need to look at the directions. Is it asking for the area? Is it asking for volume? And then you need to identify the shape. This one is length times width times height. You just drew that into your notebook. You have those 3 measurements. So another way this could be written, you had the volume, it's capital, it's going to equal the length. I'm going to write that in cursive so that it doesn't look like a 1. That's the length times the width times the height. And so when you work your problems, you just need to find those 3 numbers, and it's all multiplication. One thing to keep in mind is your answers are going to be in the 3rd power always. And what we need to figure out is why. Why are these answers all in the 3rd power? When you found the area was squared. For example, you had a rectangle. And so when you multiplied the two sides, let's say this is in miles, when you multiply the two sides, you had 3 times 4, so this is 12 miles squared. The reasons why we squared it is because you multiplied two measurements. That tells you it's a flat shape. You only had the 4 and the 3, and so it's squared. Now that we're finding the volume, you are multiplying 3 sides, and so each side gives it an exponent. So you're multiplying 3 measurements, that means the third power. So all of your answers for volume are going to be written in the third power. It's important to pay attention to that, but whenever you have a volume question, you will always be multiplying 3 measurements. So your directions are going to tell you to find the volume of the shape. So if I look at this first one, this is what it looks like. And so I see I have the rectangular prism, so I need to make sure to use the correct formula. It's going to be the length times the width times the height. So you only need 3 numbers, so you got to be careful because looking at your problem, you have 5 numbers. And so it's very important to make sure that you choose the correct numbers. The easiest way to do this is to pick one of your rectangles and start with that. Now, because all of these numbers are being multiplied, as long as you pick 2 numbers from one rectangle and then pick a number coming off of it, the order doesn't matter. Okay, so first thing we need to do is identify a rectangle. So I'm going to use this one. So if I look at my 2 numbers for that, it's going to be 7 and it's going to be 3. So this problem is 7 times 3. Now I'm going to cut this piece of the rectangle off and just move it over here. I don't like that. Let me go back. Okay, so I'm going to try again. I'm going to take that rectangle. I had the 7 and the 3. Now to find the height of the shape, I need to find a number that is not a part of that rectangle. And so looking at this, if you look at this 7 right here, it's this line. So if this line here is 7, that means this line is 7, which is a part of the problem we just did. And so we're not going to use that 7. So we know it's not that one. And so if we look at this 2 right here, that 2 is coming off of the rectangle. That's exactly what you want. This is also a 2, if we were just putting numbers with it. But you want to use the number for the height that is not a part of the original rectangle that you worked with. So you have 7 on this side, you have 3 on this side, and then one number coming off of it is the 2. So your problem becomes 7 times 3 times 2. This will give you your answer. So it doesn't matter how you multiply. You can do 7 times 3 first, but I think 3 times 2 is easier. So if I did 3 times 2, that equals 6. So 7 times 6, this equals 42. And because I multiplied 3 numbers, I must have a 3 for my exponent. So I have 42 meters cubed, or 42 meters to the third power. Okay, so this problem is just like the last one. You're just finding the volume. So if I'm going to find the volume, that's going to be the volume equals the length times the width times the height. Now, if it only gives you three numbers, you just multiply all three together and you get your answer. So in short, it's 5 times 10. And we can look at that. That's this rectangle, 5 times 10. And so if I put it right here, then you're going to see that one line coming up that is not with the rectangle. That's showing you the height to the other rectangle. And so that is going to be 6. So my height in this problem is 6. So if you multiply those three together, very simply, you get your answers. And so I'm going to do 10 times 6 first, just easier to work with, I feel like. So you get 60. So this problem is 5 times 60. That equals 300 meters cubed, or 300 meters to the third power. Go ahead and pause the video for this one and just try it yourself, see how you do. The directions are find the volume. So just to get it in your head, it's length times the width times the height. So if I was to take this rectangle, you would have 8 times 16. And then if you notice, you got one piece coming off. That's going to show you the height of the shape, how deep it is. And that is going to be 20. So this is what you're multiplying. This gives you your answer. 20 times 8 is going to be 160. So if I did 160 times 16, six times 0 is 0. You have 6 times 6 is 36. 6 times 1 is 6 plus 3 is 9. Next place value, make sure you put that 0 there. And then 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 6 is 6. 1 times 1 is 1. So now my problem is 960 plus 1,600. 6, 15. Final answer is 2,560 centimeters cubed. Okay, you have this shape, a cube. So we're going to look at this for just a brief moment. A cube is a rectangular prism. It's a different form of one. A cube, all sides are squared. And so what that means, this side here is, let's say 3 meters. That means this side is 3 meters. Then also this line right here is going to be 3 meters. And technically, every single one of these lines, because it is a square, is going to be 3 meters. And so that's where a cube comes from. It's the same measurement. And so the volume for this is you're going to take s to the third power. That is, that just means side. You could keep it as the length times the width times the height. You could say this is the length. You could say this was the width. And then here you have the height. It's 3 times 3 times 3, which is the same thing as that. You just took the three sides, and because it's always the same number for a cube, you're just gonna write one side and you're gonna write it 3 times. That's what that exponent is. So one side is 3, so it's 3 times 3 times 3. This is 27 meters cubed. So a cube is a rectangular prism. Whatever number you see, you just multiply that number by itself 3 times, and that will give you the answer. So in conclusion, when you're working these problems, whenever it's for volume, all of your answers will be in the third power, so don't get that mixed up with area. Area is squared, but volume is cubed. Make sure you use the correct formula. You've been working with formulas the past few weeks. You've had one for the area of parallelograms, the area of triangles, area of trapezoids. Now we're switching to volume. And so a rectangular prism with the volume, very simple. The volume is just going to equal the 3 different sides. You got the length times the width times the height. So if you do that, you should be good to go for this lesson. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get a hold of me. We'll be doing a Zoom call as well to go over this.